Got it? We are live on YouTube. Do you see it? Look at the top left corner of Zoom.
Okay, I do see that red live. So how long have we been on live? Because I feel like there's been a long pause and a silence.
It's a pause. It takes a second. All right, here we go. Shalom, shalom. Thank you, everyone. And for those who don't know who I am Rachel. And today we are interviewing our beautiful sister, Terri. But before we let her share, Kathy, say hello.
Hello, shalom. Yes, we both have such a nice kinship, friendship, and sisterhood with Terri. So we're excited to hear your story today, Terri.
Okay.
We give you the floor. Share whatever the Lord puts on your heart.
Well, I'm kind of curious for, I like to always tailor what I share to um, whoever's going to be, who the audience is. So kind of give me a tiny bit of direction here, ladies. Yeah, is there anything that particularly stands out for you?
Well, your audience is the other 66 members of the Daughters of Om Facebook page. Anybody that might find us on YouTube under Daughters of Om, where all the interviews are, and we've been giving our testimonies.
Okay. I guess I'll just take it from there then.
Okay.
At present, I am single. I have been, gosh, I don't normally ever start it that way. That's really funny. My husband passed away 7 years ago, and I am currently learning to um, find out who I am. And it's been a fun, interesting, painful at times, but really powerful journey for me these last 7 years. But you know what? I don't know really what to share.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I have 4 adult kids. I have 3 grandchildren. 2 of them are behind me in that virtual background. I have my own business. I am passionate about health and wellness. I am passionate about Yeshua. I think one of the hugest blessings to me after my husband passed away is a Christian business coach person that I met at a networking group basically told me I needed to make Jesus my husband. And that was such a profound piece of, I don't know, wisdom that she shared that I think has anchored it's made actually being single a very powerful, rewarding season in my life. I'm going to turn off this monitor. Yeah, I just feel like I have never been closer to the Father and to Yeshua, and it came though from a place of not knowing how to live on my own. And so prior to that, I was married to Paul for 32 years, and we had a very traditional um, situation in that he was always the one, he thought of himself as a provider, and um, he had several businesses, and sometimes things are good, sometimes things are bad, but no matter what, I always stayed home and I never had another job, and I always took care of the kids, and that is what I was very comfortable with, and I felt like that's what I was supposed to do to honor God, kind of a little bit of it. And it was also kind of where my heart was, because truly, truly, I think, I mean, even when we played um, like scenarios as a kid, right? I always wanted to be the mom. And I think that's what my heart's desire was. So I was very comfortable with that whole role. So after he passed away, I honestly did not know who I was, um, not being Paul's wife. So it was a huge, huge awakening for me. And I've learned so many different lessons along the way. But I can honestly say now that I am learning who I am as a child of the King, and just learning to trust him, and just walking one day at a time, doing the next right thing. And that's how I've lived these last 7 years. And I can go into detail about that, but I don't know if that's really important.
Well, Terri, tell us, were you raised growing up in the church?
I was raised, yes. So a little bit about my childhood, and I tell people that I'm Japanese. Both my parents, well, my dad is Japanese, my mom is Okinawan, and I'm American. I'm a third generation Japanese. And to me, what that meant was I have the look of an Asian person, a Japanese person. I have some of the cultural traditions of it, and I did grow up around a Japanese community in Hawaii. But I'm still very American. And after leaving Hawaii and coming to Oregon for the last almost 4 decades, gosh, um, I don't even feel Japanese very much at all. And it was someone called me a banana once, and I looked at him like, "What? Banana?" And he goes, "Yeah, you're yellow on the outside, but you're white on the inside." So, but really though, my point is, and I've kind of anchored on this for all these years, being in a culture that I don't like, I forget what I look like. I just feel like I'm talking to people. I don't look at what the color of their skin is. I'm just me, and talking and relating to them as a person, right? And I forget people are looking at me differently, maybe because of the way I look. But I tell people that we're all here in a costume. And deep down inside, it's that spirit, man, is it doesn't, it's not like it's like there's an identity outside of him, but it's not anchored in how we look, or how tall we are, or how smart we are, or how much money we have, or what our ethnic background is. And that anyway, I know people look at me like an Asian person, and I've actually learned to use it to my advantage. So, um, but yeah, I grew up in Hawaii. I was a very sheltered, very, my mom, I was the oldest. She was very, very careful, with your first. And I was babied, and I felt like maybe I was raised as a little China doll. I don't know, like I was going to break or something, but I literally was very fearful. I have a Port Weinstein birthmark on my face. And I think my mom and my parents always thought that they were afraid that I was going to get teased or something at school, or it was going to somehow mark me or hinder me. And on some level, I think it did, in the sense that I was super quiet, super shy. If the world was divided into a possum, a predator, or a protector, I was always the possum. Always. Never spoke up, never drew attention to myself. I was always probably the smallest child in the class or next to the smallest. And I just remember um, just never speaking up, whether I had the right answer or someone was being mean to someone or I knew what was going on. I never tattled on anybody. I just never spoke up. And I don't know, that was just me.
Mm.
And I think in the Japanese culture, you just live to do the right thing and don't bring shame upon the family. And so I learned not to bring shame on the family. And I don't know, I think my mom thought she had a lot of work with the two girls, but I think we were pretty easy, raising two girls, and I did want to please my parents. And I took a test with my youngest daughter a few years ago with a counselor, and I scored really, really, really high in the responsibility category. And it was so high, it was almost to the point of um, obsession. But I think I've always been overly responsible, and it's kind of been a curse to me. And being so responsible, it's kind of like you don't want to make a mistake and you don't want to let anybody down. And I tell people that I mean, my parents were very stable, very, very stable, and we never ever had to worry about finances. But I also tell people, so I tell people I grew up on a steamship or a cargo ship, and it was stable, it was strong, it could ride the waves of life, but it was not Carnival Cruise Lines, and it was not super exciting or fun or funny or anything. It was just very stable and serene. And then I did have this very wild teenage years. I rebelled. I smoked a lot of um, in Hawaii we called it pakalolo back then, but it was just pot. And and anyways, we were pretty wild back then, and they were not as strict with ID or hanging out on the beach like they are now. And so we got away with a lot of stuff. But um anyway, so and then I met Paul, and I tell people that he rescued me, and I actually met him in church of all things. And he was a haole and he was a Marine. And there are all these things like I cannot believe like whoever, like those Marine guys, they were just like lower than the lowest of, I don't know, it was just not appealing, right? But how did I end up with him? I just tell people I met him in church, and literally I do believe God used him to rescue me. But little did I know, I went from the cargo ship and I literally got into the rowboat. And I feel like my life has been defined by so many like clear seasons. Like this was a transition, and that when we were married, my life changed, but I did not understand how, or I did not even understand what we were getting married into. I mean, I had this formulation that we were going to have this stable lifestyle the way my parents provided for me. That was not it at all. And so I lived for 32 years on this rowboat, and it took me up until year 17 to to actually finally just accept, because from the very beginning to year 17, I literally would go to God. I think I made a mistake. How did I end up here? I know this is not right. And we were so opposite. We were opposite in every way, shape, or form. And at sometimes it was a good thing. I mean, Paul was, um, he articulated his thoughts so well. He was such a good writer. Kathy, you would relate to him, but he would correct. I mean, he would edit books that have already been published and circle the all of the misspellings or the um, I don't know, correct their grammar.
I'm
And
totally guilty of that.
yeah, and so it's like, I mean, that was Paul. Like, we were opposite. He was a really, really good speaker, and I never spoke up. And in that regard, I learned to, it's kind of like it made it easy for me because I didn't have to think of creative conversation with Paul around. He was the entertainment, and I could just smile and just, uh, anyway, and he liked authority and he took control. And I just learned after a lot of very loud conflicts, um, that was easier just to go along with the flow. So I just kind of learned to go along. And even when I didn't agree, I went along with it. And so there are things that I mean, in some ways it was easier because I didn't have to make as many decisions or be responsible for it, but yet I was still responsible for it because I had to own my own choices, but I really never did. And anyway, so that's kind of my life. So I went from the cargo ship to the rowboat, and our life was up and down, and it was it and yeah, it pushed me. It pushed me way to the edges of my comfort zone when it came to finances, when it came to um, people that, I mean, the kind of people that Paul was comfortable with, I was not necessarily, and vice versa. And yeah, it was just a huge change.
Now, I remember you telling me that he's a Midwest boy.
Mhm.
So how was that, Hawaii Island life um, changed to kind of sort of Midwest living, right?
Well, it was a Midwest thinking. We did not live in Pearson, but I did live in Pearson for the one benefit we had, I think, that really got us through our marriage was for like maybe 6 months. I lived with his family in a three. So he grew up in a family of 8 kids. They had 3 bedrooms, a boys' room, a girls' room, and the parents' room. And anyway, so I stayed with the girls and the girls. Anyway, that was a whole um, season. And there were so many good and bad things about that season for me, but that kind of gave a foundation because I got to be a child again. I got to hang out with his sisters, and to this day we still kind of laugh about the games I used to play with them. And I was probably like 21, maybe 20 when I was there. And then the following summer, he went back to Hawaii and he actually lived in a like section of the house. Anyways, he lived in the house as well, but we were very good. I mean, anyway, um, but I think it was because of that we understood each other a little more. Because if I didn't have that background, so I did live in the small town and we were opposites. So I had a family of 2 girls. He had a family of 4 girls, 4 boys, and chaos. And he had a small town. I think his graduating class had like 50 kids at the most, maybe 38. I have no idea, but it was small, right? I my graduating class was 700 kids. And it was, yeah, it was big. and it was like a city basically. And I grew up, like I said, with the financial security, and he grew up in financial chaos. And I grew up in a Church of Christ, but my mom went to church and took us to church. And my father was not a Christian, and he drank beer. And we basically just went to church, but we lived a very regular life. Like, what I didn't realize was, see, I used to go to church and think it was just us or our family because my dad wasn't a Christian, that we weren't praying every single meal, or we had beer bottles around, or whatever the it is, right? It took me a while to realize that most of church was kind of pretty much the way I was raised, but I didn't know it then. So I had this image of all these families at church that were so perfect. Anyways, Paul's family, they were that church family. He was, they did not drink. They went to church like every single time the doors were open, and they were very religious, and he grew up in a instrumental Church of Christ.
Mm.
And I think if that's the one thing too that allowed us to stay together for all those years, as different as we were. And we both are pretty strong-willed. I realize I am very strong-willed too. I was just showed it in a different way. Like I was quiet about it. But if it wasn't for the fact that we both really wanted to honor God for our kids, for each other, I do not think we would have stayed together.
Wow.
How long was he in the military? You said he was a Marine. So
He
did he
was-
do like his 4 or 5 years and get out, or?
Yes.
And so how long was he in when you got married? Was he just getting out?
So basically, I didn't really get to know him until he was towards the end of his time in the military. And so he actually got out. And I thought, I was like in tears. I had just like, I told you I was wild, and I had made this decision to to devote my life to God. And back then, all it was quitting all the partying and going to church every Sunday. That was, I thought that was the ultimate sacrifice, and then doing all the things that the Church of Christ said. I mean, there were things you did, like you took the Lord's Supper and you went to church, and um, but I did make that shift, and I did make it on my own without him. He did not pressure me. He let me go. After a certain point, he just didn't try to preach to me anymore. And we just got to get to know each other. Anyways, I thought he was going to leave and I would never see him again, and that would be it. But he came back. He came back that summer. Then he went to school. Anyways, we just had this. And then I know what it was. He talked me into going to Columbia or to Portland. And I ended up living with a gal who came from our church and being one of her roommates in an apartment. And then we went back uh, to Pearson that summer. So we just had this long, like a 3-year kind of on again, off again, very interesting relationship. Parts of it was long distance, but
At what point did he go to the seminary?
he didn't really, I don't know if you'd call it seminary. He went to Columbia Christian College, and he was a
Okay.
theology major. And um, it was, well, he went that year that I came up, but then after that, he kind of took some time off, and then he went back to school, um, maybe a year or two later. You know what?
Okay.
Honestly, I can't remember. But when we got married, he still had 2 year, 2 or 3 years left.
Okay.
So,
And how long were you in the Church of Christ?
um, that's a good question. It's really funny being, you'd think that if he went to a Church of Christ college and he took their theology, they would teach Church of Christ doctrine. But because he took a theology degree, he actually um, learned a very broad theology, and it was way outside of the Church of Christ and the Church of Christ doctrine. And he had some very good, I consider them really good teachers, but he knew enough to know that the doctrine in the Church of Christ was not 100% like correct. I mean, it's okay. He knew it was okay to worship with instruments. He
Mm.
knew that there was the charismatic element. We didn't experience it, but he knew it was not sinful. You know, speaking in tongues was not from the devil. It was just kind of this interesting. It was just I still kind of wonder how they expected to send these kids back out to the Church of Christ and survive there. But anyway, so we he his first preaching gig, we moved to the coast, and after about a year or two, I can't remember how long we were down there. It wasn't even 2 years. I think it was less than 2 years. He kind of comes to me and he says, "You know what? I don't know if I can do this anymore." And I'm thinking, why? And he says, well, he'd go to meet with these other pasts or preachers. They call them preachers that in that denomination. And they'd have a preacher's breakfast, a Church of Christ preacher's breakfast every month. And he'd talk with all these other guys. And most of them were older, kind of like in retirement age ish, in these small congregations. Because Terri, none of them believe what they're telling their congregation. Because they all believe, it's okay, but they can't tell their congregation that, because the congregation would go, they'd go nuts, right? And then you get fired and you lose your job. And he's like, well, I just don't know if I can do this. And I was kind of like shocked, like, what did you just spend the last 4 years, you know, um, working towards? Anyways, um,
Paperwork to
we
get a degree. Yeah.
left. And
Wow.
so and we came back up here, and that's when he started different businesses.
How did his parents and your parents take you guys leaving the church?
Probably not that great, but you know what? The freedom of not being so close to your parents is I don't know. I don't even think we stopped to question it, really. And then we did take my mom to the churches we were going to, and then there were a few churches that Paul, in fact, the group and the people that I fellowship with now, some of them, like the people that started Rise, they were people that we, like Paul pastored them for, and it was way back in the day when um, our kids were little. So my daughter is probably 27 years ago that he would, and it was just a small group of people. We had just come to visit them, really like them. The kids were, the same age as our kids. And um, long story short, they were just kind of in this place where they were having this dissension with their pastor was getting a lot of pressure from his denomination, and he ended up leaving his denomination too. But so he, anyways, they were without a pastor basically. So Paul stepped in and became their pastor basically. But the one thing he chose not to do was take any money for it, and he wanted to just do it as, this is the way I'm going to contribute, and this is not a job. I'm not trying to use this to better my resume so I get another job somewhere else. It wasn't like that at all. And I just love that because I didn't feel pressure, and so we got to just
You weren't a true pastor's wife, right?
it was just very to me it's kind of the way church should be, but it's not always the way it is. But that's just my own thing. But anyway, when my mom would come to visit, we would take her to church with us. And at times we would take her, even after that, we would take her to some of the churches that we were going to. Because we didn't stay there all that time. Because once they got a full-time pastor, Paul thought it was better for him if we just left. So we did, but we did take her. But it's kind of funny, after a certain point, she would come visit every year. We would end up, when she came to church, we would go to the Church of Christ. So that's kind of how we ended up dealing with it for her comfort zone, which was fine too, because they were, I mean, it's like we still always saw, it was like seeing old friends,
Mhm.
because Paul went to college with a lot of people. And anyway, the funny thing is, and I just thought about this right now. So my daughter Ashley is sitting with me in church, and right in front of me is the son and the wife, and he's like my age, of a lady that was my mom's really good friend. And every time she'd come up, we would go to Mary's house. So she got to meet Mary. Ashley got to meet Sam and talk about his mom. And then there was a few other people that were kind of in the fringes that all knew Ashley when she was little. And then there was another couple that also went to Columbia Christian as well. So it's just kind of funny that everything comes full circle. And um, anyway, I digress.
That's okay. It's interesting. It's how we
Yeah.
get to know each other, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about, if you could, about life without your husband.
Life with my husband. So life with my husband was, Paul was always like the energy, the humor, the spark almost. Like he had a lot of energy, and he kind of like dictated everything unspokenly. I mean, I did. That's not right. I just am not phrasing this well, and I have not pre-thought this. But anyways, life without Paul, for me, it has just been a process. And at first it was, I think for me, it's been a process of awareness of who I am. And at first, I think I had such a disconnect with what I knew in my mind, but yet my body was saying something totally different. And it was, I knew God was going to take care of me. I knew that He had a plan. I fully trusted Him. There was no part of me that I blamed God or I didn't trust him. But what I could not understand was how I felt always so conflicted and so fearful. And I'd say 24/7, I was always in my gut nervous, and like every little thing was uncomfortable. Taking my daughter to a soccer game by myself was uncomfortable, even though I did it so many times on my own. It's not like he came with me, but somehow it was just scary. Going to church, and I did go to church a lot on my own, it was not a big deal, but it felt very alone. And I was shocked that I felt that way. And and but that fear on the inside of my gut, that was just something that I could not explain, but it was very, I don't know, kind of like I was just this nervous little um, scared animal everywhere I went. And it took a series of changes, I think, for me to, you know, feel any type of um, wholeness, maybe.
Well, you're not whole when you lose your partner. You've lost part of you. So while the partner has transitioned to heaven, you're transitioning here now, depending more on the Father than you ever had to before, per se. So yeah, and we're not taught how to deal with that.
True. And there was grief for sure.
Yeah.
And how do we grieve? We're not taught that in our culture. And I just remember um, 2 years after Paul passed away, I got to this place where I literally just sat down and I wrote a whole list of things that it was like an apology letter, that all these things I was sorry for and things that I could not see prior to that that period of time. It's like I had to lose him to realize, wow, he really did a lot for me. He there were so many things he did, and there were so many ways I did not know how I could have positively took our struggles and turned them into something that could have been really powerful. But I was so focused on the end result.
Yeah.
And I think back, I know all the healing, all the prayers, anything that I wanted for my husband, really, and it took me years to realize this, but I think for so long, I wanted his healing for myself. All I wanted was that security, maybe, that stability, that I mean, it wasn't until the very end that I realized, oh my goodness, it has nothing to do with habits or responsibility. It was about brokenness.
Yeah.
It was about brokenness, and it was about deep seated wounds that I don't think Paul had the capacity to deal with. But I didn't know it at the time. And so as things were revealed, um, I I kind of, yeah, I just had this whole list, and I just remember writing it all out. I think I still have it, but there were just so many things that I apologized to Paul for. Please forgive me for all of this. And um, so there was a lot of aha moments that happened after the fact.
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
was a lot of just a lot of growth. I had to learn how to um, just be responsible. I had to learn how to um, do little things like pay bills without getting. I think for me, the bills was like a trauma in and of itself because of all the years of our financial insecurity. So it took years to process off of that and to just not have trauma around money. And
Yeah.
anyways, there was just a lot. I think I felt so thankful when I found out about Dr. Carolyn Leaf and the fact that our brains are malleable. And because honestly, I did not know that. And because I was brought up that our brains are fixed at a certain point and we can't change. And so, anyways, once I started reading her books and doing that 21-day detox, I felt like things started to get processed out. And that was all these years of detoxing. But in that process, I was able to go back into my childhood. I was able to, as things came up, deal with them. And so there's just been a ton of that in the last 7 years. And it's all come in stages. And learning to just recognize things like in your brain, how to quiet your brain down, how to not live in that fight or flight all the time, and to recognize when it's happening. And there are times when I still, it kind of triggers me, and certain things come up, and I just kind of am back in that state. So just to be able to recognize it now, because I think I lived in it for so long, it was just normal.
How are your adult daughters? Did they learn about how to process grief and how to process things you had suppressed throughout all that time? Have they seen that through you?
Um, I think my daughters, actually, all of the kids have processed it in their own way. But the three older kids, they were not in the home. And so
Yeah,
I wasn't able to really walk through it with them. And even with my daughter here, we're kind of like this really private family. And so that's one of the things I think that, and it was both our sides of the family. Paul's family just never shared any conflict and pretended like if we just pretend everything's okay, then we'll just keep it under the rug kind of, and we'll just ignore it. And that's how he lived. So he buried all of that inside, and that's like part of it. I didn't know how, I don't think he knew how to process it. And then and same with my side of the family. So even with my own daughter who was here at the time, she was 14, I don't know if we really ever processed it together necessarily. She was like on her own journey, I was on my own. And I mean, if I went backwards, it'd be totally different. I would have different
of
conversations
course.
with her. Um, but at the time, I just,
You're just coping
You were grieving. Yeah.
and
we
grieving and just coping with every one day at a time.
But we did do some things together. Like we took this grief course and
Mm.
she got taken away with the kids her age and I was in you know, a room. It's like 8 weeks, with the adults and there was all this paperwork but I didn't really process the paperwork very well. I just kind of let it sit on the folder and I mean, anyway, it was just it was just kind of a interesting season, and Rebecca did take it the hardest. I think she's 22 now, and sometimes I think back and just raising her for those years was kind of a distraction in a way from me to, I mean, it gave me something to focus on. And
Absolutely.
I maybe was partially strong for her because I didn't want her to see me fall apart. Um, so yeah, that was just kind of an interesting season.
No doubt.
And it's, one thing about grief, I thought it was like a one and done thing, but it takes a while to realize, you know what, it never, not that it goes away. It's like the person's always going to be a part of you. There's
Yep.
always going to be memories. And I thank Paul all the time for so many things that I learned. So one of the biggest things though that has happened in the last, you know, 7 years as I'm going through this phase, I remember maybe in year like 2, just trying to figure out, okay, I need to figure out what am I going to do with my life. And I do remember it's like one thing I know, I've always been passionate about health and wellness. And I've always had this weird kind of a thing for water, like knowing that that's super important in our bodies. And I've always gone out of my way for water. It's kind of in the wrong places at times, but you only, you just have to go with what you know at the time. And so it's the fact that Paul had created this business for me, to me was like a gift, right? And and sometimes I just remember laughing at God, thinking, here you've given me this gift, this business, it, um, and yet I have no skills for this business, none. In fact, I took Toastmasters for years, but when I first joined, I could not even do a 45-second table talk, like impromptu talk. I could only talk for like 5 seconds. Or, I mean, it was hard. It was really hard. But still just like laughing, like how did it's like you expect me to do this, and he just, I have just trusted that and just believed that this is what he wanted me to do. And then he did even tell me, well, I take that back. I feel like I got the impression in my times with him that he used Paul, number one, to rescue me from that life pattern I was involved in, that addiction, and brought me out of it. But also, I needed to be pushed around. I needed to be in that rowboat because I needed to build a relationship with God, to trust Him. And I think sometimes He's laughing, just like I see Him laughing, just, she needs this. That's good for her. So you're scared now? Yes, you can do this, Terri. And anyway, it was all part of the plan. Like there is not a mistake. It was not a mistake. And so as I'm making all these realizations, and he gives me, so I do feel like God gives me these gifts on a silver platter every single day, and I get to choose. I did not have to pick up the business, but he gave it to me, and I felt like he wanted me to do it. And it is part of what is in my heart. And I think that has just kept me going all these years, because I'll be honest, there's more days I want to quit than not. And it has taken me to so many aspects of my own fear zone that I've had to walk into. But another thing, another really profound influencer for my life is Lance Wallnow. And he had this whole talk about the seven mountains, um, and it's really interesting because it was a random thing that I started listening to him. I did not know him at all. And I ended up getting some of his teachings on business and business in the kingdom. And he talked about when you are in the business realm, it allows you to go into the marketplace. And it's not like you wear Christian tattooed all over your head, but you can go in and work like undercover. And somehow there's something about it that just inspired me to go in. And it wasn't until just this past in 2020, I listened to, I think her name is Yolanda McClure, or anyway, but she does that. She literally teaches her prayer partners or prayer team um, to go undercover and to not even let people have a clue that they know you're coming. Anyway, that's always kind of been my motivation for going out there. And the one thing I know that the business has done for me is because before, my comfort zone was in church. I'm very comfortable around that church mindset in that environment, and especially around Christian women. And that's another thing. He like kicked me out the door, and he got me out into a whole nother realm. And it is not my comfort zone to be in business. I I've had to learn a lot, but I actually kind of like it. And it kind of is like, I really, really, really respect people that have their own business, because it is hard. There's a lot that you carry on your shoulders, especially if you have employees. And yeah, I have just grown to really respect business owners.
So my understanding that this business was your husband's business that you inherited?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how long had he been doing this business?
I think maybe 5 years or so. Maybe 2011, 2010-ish. I should probably find that out.
Might be good for you to know.
Anyway, I just
But
call it.
now you're expanding that, and you're doing a few other things still related with that, but you're kind of expanding your business in a sense, right?
Well, I have a business, yes, but I just have a couple other products. But it's all hydration related, and it all stems from the idea of detoxifying your cells. And so basically, our health is dependent on how healthy our cells are. And if you keep the toxins out of your cells, clean it out, you will improve your health. But there's so much in our culture and our food and the air we breathe that keeps us kind of sick and toxic. And I think oftentimes people don't know it, but the problem is people do not do anything about it until they get to a stage that it's really, people don't get diagnosed with any type of illness till they're in, out of the 7 stages of toxicity, it's like 6 and 7. And at that point, you've really pushed your body so far, when you could be doing little things back here and keeping your body really, really, healthy. So you never get to that point. And but yeah, I think in our culture we just don't think about being proactive, and we think about getting the pill, go to the doctor, get medications, which just makes you,
That's the programming.
that's the programming, that's right. So
Or get another vaccine.
gosh, don't get me started on that one. But yes, that is the programming. So that's what I like to try to help people to understand. There's little things you can do, and actually, to me, big things is change your water, because our bodies are 70 to 75% water, and that's a big shift that you can do. And I do tell people the type of water you drink really does matter. So.
So one thing you haven't talked about is your running. I know you love to run, or if you don't love it, you do a lot of running.
Well, that's funny that you would say it as a lot, because to be really honest, I used to run twice as much even during COVID, that I've just cut the distances down. In fact, I was yeah, I just don't feel like I run a lot, but I do try to run on a regular basis, and I just only run 3 miles. When at a certain time I was running, 5, 6, and 7 miles at a time, but it's all good. And so you want to hear a story about running?
Yeah, tell
How
us.
I got started? Well, way back in the day. So basically, and we did talk about the Church of Christ, but in the Church of Christ, they do not talk about relationship. Fast forward, my oldest daughter was like already 14 at the time. The twins were like 9 and 10. And I had just gone all my life with the doing. And I did have a relationship with God, but it wasn't personal. It wasn't very intimate. And I had gotten to have a connection with a Graham Cook. And I don't know if you guys have listened to him, but it's kind of like the Lance Wallnau thing. Someone introduced him to me, and I just kind of gravitated. I locked on to his cassette tapes. Back then it was cassette tapes of all things. And I had all these notes, and I just kept listening and listening, and I just,
At least they weren't 8-track tapes.
well, yeah. Anyway,
They could have been.
right? Anyway, so mine were cassette tapes, but I just loved that intimacy that he had with the Father. And I just remember thinking, I want that too, and starting to pray. And I actually remember so profoundly seeing God face to face, but it's not even seeing him like since the mystic movement, or since, just recently, right? It was like a knowing and feeling, because I don't think I saw anything in the visual sense, but it was just this feeling of love, of warmth, of just protection. And actually, you know what it was? It's like knowing when you're in the Father's heart. But I didn't have those words back then. But that was my introduction to God in relationship. But all I remember was this joy, and this profound joy that it just drew me. And I really, so what had happened was my husband lost his business, his construction business. We went from this 3,000 square foot house that we rented, and we rented this 3 bedroom, probably 1,500 square foot house out in the country. And I just felt like I felt like I was being pruned. But to be really honest, I also did think that Jesus died died for my um, American privilege and lifestyle, right? So it's kind of like I might be at the time I was feeling like this is absolutely horrible and we're losing everything and I couldn't get haircuts anymore or whatever it was, right? But that was the background of that season, and that's when I kind of latched on to Graham Cook. So long story short, I met um, God intimately for the first time, fell in love with him. I was never a morning person, but back then I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, which I thought was really, really early. Now it's not compared to 4 o'clock, but um, it was like I just got up to be with him. And I would just get up to be with him, get up to be with him, because I just could not let go of that joy. It was so profound. And I think I did that for maybe a year. And I think God got so bored of spending time with me, the same thing every single morning, that he kicked me out the door. He says, "You are going to go and run." And I literally was in Corbett. I remember running around this 1 mile track. I would drop the kids off, and Rebecca was little. And so Paul was home with Rebecca, and I dropped the kids off at school, and I'd run around this track. And I did that every day for like a month. And then the second month, I ran around it twice. So I was 2 miles. And yeah, I just every time I would go out to run, he would show up, and I would see glimpses of him and his glory, and just it was like he drew me out there, and that's how it started. And I've been running ever since. And Rebecca was little, and now she's 22. And that was a person who never did anything athletic in her life.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's
Isn't it
awesome.
wonderful? Isn't it wonderful how he draws us out? So, do you feel any pressing message that you would like to end with that the Lord's really putting on your heart?
Any pressing message? Probably not. Here's what I want to share. I'm so thankful for the people he draws into my life, like the two of you and the whole group. And you guys know that part of my story, coming into this whole realm of ascension and seeing the Father, being with the Father, being with Jesus, walking through the portals, going on the other side. That part is it's a whole new level of journey for me. And that's just this whole other thing. It's like always that philosophy, take the next right step, feeling my way into his truth. And I think that's what has got me on this path, and that's what has got me to where I am in any area of my life. And so yeah, the encouragement is just to do the next right thing. And I'm so thankful for you guys. I learned so much. I feel like I'm so way behind everybody else, but like I'm always gleaning little bits and pieces of, things that my brain is ready to comprehend, and then just kind of take that and move forward. So it's super fun. Every day. Every day is an adventure. Every day is fun, and God is good. And I still get that silver platter. You know, it's
We're only limited if we choose to allow ourselves to say we're limited. And Terri, we are so grateful that he's brought you into our lives as well. There was a divine connection when we all met in New Mexico. So I feel the same way you do, that you've expressed about feeling for me, and for Rachel. So we're blessed also.
We love and honor you. And
Yes.
we are so happy that you are a part of what the Lord has put together. And don't ever feel like you're behind. That's my encouragement to you, because we're all on our own journey. And for our audience, if you listen to each story, you're going to see that we are very diverse.
Mhm.
You've lost your partner in life on the earth realm, right?
mm-hmm.
He went before you. We heard one of our ladies talk about being raped. And we've talked about someone being in a cult. We've talked about the other side of someone being in a prophetic, the prophetic movement in ministry, and going to the world stage of being on, so every testimony is so different and unique, and we're all at a different place in our lives. So it's a don't compare yourself to anyone else, because this is your journey. And that's my message to everyone, is this is your journey.
And here we are, all actually connected.
Yes. And there's a lot of similarities, and I didn't interject while you were speaking, but there are a lot of things that are similar in all of us.
Right.
And as you listen, as you listen to each testimony of how the Lord has worked in your life and kind of like plucked you away, right? He pulled you away from your family. You went to Oregon. They were in Hawaii. His family was it Nebraska?
Iowa.
Iowa. So it's not like you were there in the same place as your family. So, there's a lot of similarities, yet very different lives that we've all led. And I really believe that's what the Lord wants out in his airways, this frequency of your voice, the frequency of, each one of our voices going out, because each is penetrating a specific person or persons, right? I've always said to the Lord, if there's only one person that comes to know you because of me, I'm okay with that.
Right.
Right?
I agree. Yes.
Doesn't have to be the tens and thousands and millions of people, although, we would love that. But there's someone out there that had to hear your testimony, the steps that you've had to go through in life. There's someone out there that will be impacted by that. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Terri.
I know you were kind of nervous about it, but you did great.
Yep.
Well, I think so. I don't like to listen to myself speak. So it'd be interesting if I even listened to this. But I think if I were to listen to this, I would want to edit out a lot of stuff. Not because I didn't want to share it, but more just I could have said it differently or
Sure.
that kind of thing. How can
We're our worst critics.
so
Yep. Yep.
well, I feel like in this group, definitely it is a group of very highly creative, talented people that have a really great grasp on the English language and communication. I mean, I feel like I'm in a group of like Pauls or something, all of you writers and speakers and um, editors. That's another thing he did for me too. He would edit my emails, and it's like, anyway.
Sometimes it's so that we can grow and take our rightful place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, we say shalom. Have a fantastic day, week, year, and eternity.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you so much for coming on, Terri. Thanks for joining us, Kathy.
Yes.
And we
My
shall
pleasure.
see you at the next interview with Tina on Tuesday.